I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm so thrilled to be joined by Maika Monroe to talk all about her latest film, Longlegs. And one of the things I immediately loved about your performance in this film is you've worked within the horror and thriller genre before, but it feels like there's so much restraint to this character. You know, she's a more introverted personality type, a little bit quieter spoken. And so I was really interested in the journey of reading the scripts and finding those kind of characteristic and personality details that you've interlaced into her.
Yeah, it was definitely something like a very different role than I've ever done before. Um, it was actually, I mean, Oz and I talked a lot and about the character and as you know, because you've seen the film, the backstory and her childhood is a big part of who she is. But it was one of the first days on set, which was the scene with her FBI partner, and she's kind of thrown into this sort of very intense situation very quickly. And we were kind of playing around and it was like so clear that she was so incredibly awkward with having just a normal conversation. But then when she's sort of thrown into this intense, that's where she like almost feels more comfortable. But yeah, it was really such an incredible role to play because I think there's so many layers to her and there's so much depths and so much is suppressed for her. So yeah.
And I love that you were describing talking with Oz Perkins, the writer and director of the film, about her childhood, because there's even a moment where she talks about actually when I was a kid, I really wanted to be an actress. And,
Yeah.
you know, I think she was about 20 when she realized she wanted to go into law enforcement. And so how much did the two of you talk about what were her original ideas for adulthood and what was it that led her into law enforcement originally?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's hard, I don't want to give anything away, but I think, she was this young girl that had all these big dreams and a lot changed very quickly for her. And I think what she experienced as a child transformed her and the way that she looked at the world. And I think also her wanting to feel some sort of control or feel some sort of feeling that, yeah, I don't know. I think that a lot of what she went through led her to becoming an agent.
I love that mention that you just said about the idea of control being something that's kind of that she really likes and that it's kind of stabilizing for her because it feels like she's someone who operates in the world on logic and information instead of reacting to things emotionally. And so was that a very different space to play a character in? Because the majority you're looking at, well, what is their emotional response to something?
Definitely. I loved it because it's so different from me. I'm such an emotional person. I react in that way. So it was like very interesting and challenging. And I don't know, I just like love the way, yeah, the way that she takes in the information is very level-headed and calm. And I'm like, God, I wish I had some of that in me.
It also feels like she's the complete antithesis to a scream queen that we associate within the genre because, you know, you were alluding to there's something that we see her witness and go through early in the film. And it's quite harrowing of an experience, but she's not sitting there, you know, having any sort of vocal response. Instead, it's stillness and quietness. And so how did you set about always looking at what's the more restrained response that she would have?
I mean, I think again, so much for her is suppressed. I think, you've seen the film, so but there's certain questions that are asked of her, and she's like, I don't remember that. I don't have any recollection, which I think is interesting. And I think it's very common for people to sort of black out certain memories from their childhood, and only certain events will bring those things to the surface and to the forefront. And I think that was something that I really wanted to do with her, that nothing is brought up until it's brought up and boils and there's no suppressing it anymore.
Definitely. And in terms of building her relationship with her mom, at first we see that relationship where your character Lee has had a really tough long day and she, it's like she wants to call her mom at the end of the day when she can't sleep, but we immediately sense that things are a little bit disjointed, and then we get to see her going home to visit a little bit. And so how did you and Alicia Witt talk about, what do you feel like their relationship was when she was little, and then how do you feel like it's set in the present day where things are a little bit more strange between them?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know what Alicia was gonna bring. It's a very intense role. And I just remember on set for the first day, um, with her and was just blown away by all these like little emotions that she brought in and her own trauma and like her own, issues. I think as you get older, you realize like, oh, my parent is just a human being. And when you're a kid, you think they can protect you. But you get older and you're like, oh, we're just all trying to figure it out. And so I think, what I love that Oz had me do with one of the phone calls with her, he was like, I want you to, when you hear her say this, I want you to see if there's any sort of like smile or something that would come out, because at the end of the day, she is your mother. And like you said, she's the person that I wanted to call and I wanted to tell, even though once I call her and hear her voice, I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have called her. But it's a very complicated relationship, which I think a lot of people can relate to.
Right. And there's also a lot between the two of them centered around religion, which is something that's really important to her mom. And every single time they have a conversation, one of the first things out of her mom's mouth is, have you been saying your prayers recently? And at the beginning, she kind of plays along with it. And then there is a moment where she's like, no, and I never actually did because it always scared me too much. And so I was curious about your thoughts about Lee's relationship with religion, particularly in the way it pertains to her mom and the fact that she does give her that revelation of like, actually, this was different for me.
Yeah. I mean, I think for a lot of kids, at least I felt this way as a kid, I would always, you want to rebel and sort of go against what your parents are forcing down your throat. And I think that that was a big thing with Lee. It's like, something that she saw her mother, and there was no part that she didn't want to be like her mother. I think she saw a version that wasn't her future. And so I think she really veered away from that. But I think it was such a beautiful moment that Alicia brought to that scene where when I say, I never did that. And then I think she starts laughing or something, that she finds humor in that. And I thought that was like such a beautiful kind of moment to have between the two of them.
And it's such a great point that you bring up that idea of rebelling and trying to be completely opposite, because it's such a great detail when you look at her mom's home and where you look at where Lee lives, where she's kind of chosen to live somewhere very remote and distant, and there's barely anything around her. There's like barely anything even on her desk. And yet her mom's place is, I haven't gotten rid of a single thing from your childhood. And so for you, were those details very much in that vein for her?
Definitely. I mean, I Oz and I kind of talked about this, but I was like, can we bring in like a little sort of OCD-ness to this character? Because I think, again, it's like the opposite of her mother, wanting to be in control, having everything clean, organized, having a plan. So yeah, I definitely wanted to bring that in.
Did you think she was someone who was quite isolated from the get-go when you read the script? Because, in the film, it's kind of like the lead up to her birthday, and there's nothing about what are you going to do for your birthday? Have dinner with your friends. There's kind of like no conversation of a life outside of work for her very much.
Yeah, I think she is a lonely person, but I think that's her choice. That's her choice. She's much more comfortable
Yeah.
being alone. And I think there's something quite beautiful about that too, just being very sort of comfortable in her own space.
No, I totally agree with it. It's
Yeah,
it's actually a very endearing thing. And
yeah, it
one of
is.
one of the other things that I feel like really subverts with this character is so often it's okay, as you get closer, like you're rebelling, you're pushing back on the rules, but she loves following rule and order. And there's a great scene early on with her boss where he's like, come have a drink with me at the bar. And she's like, well, I don't drink. And he's like, but still come. And she's like, okay, there's no conversation, there's no pushback.
Mhm.
And so did you see her as someone who really operates within kind of like the order and the rules of the world?
Definitely. Yeah. It was, I just love that about her too. Because again, it's so opposite of me and how I go through life. And I just, again, like you just said, it's like so endearing. And there's this like, I don't know, just this vulnerability and like innocence that you kind of feel with how she, communicates, and especially with her boss. Um, yeah, there's just something quite beautiful about it. And yeah, I don't know.
And that scene with her boss, with Agent Carter, he then is like, come drop me off at my place, come in, meet my wife, meet my daughter. And I love the scene where the daughter's like, come see my bedroom, because it's such a kid thing to do. And Lee
Totally.
just like sits stoically on the other side. Did you have that immediate idea of like, this is where she would sit, this is how she would sit, this is how she'd be really distant, the idea of it?
Yeah, it was one of my favorite scenes. When I watch back the movie, I love that scene because there's, again, the movie's very dark and it's, very disturbing, and you have this sort of, again, this innocence that you see, and she almost connects easier with a kid. And there's like, she's still uncomfortable, but the questions that this kid is asking, I don't know, it's just so sweet. But yeah, we had so much fun filming that scene. It was great.
Yeah. I love her response when the kid is like, oh, is it scary being a female FBI agent?
Yeah.
And she's like, actually, it is. And
Yeah.
it was interesting to see that kind of vulnerability and forthrightness. And did you and Oz talk about, what sort of situations do you feel like she's been in before that would lead to an answer like that?
Yeah, I think, we brought in, again, like the opening of the movie, the introduction to my characters put on this case and experiences something very gruesome just right out of the gate. And I think that we brought that memory back in that moment, just the intensity of the job and what it entails,
Mhm.
for sure.
Was there any specific research or kind of like information that you were digging up when you were taking on this role? Because it's not just about the sensibility or the day to day, even comes down to the physicality of when she walks into a space. How does she walk into a space?
Yeah, I think you know, they had amazing people on set, like helping me, how you enter a room with the gun and stuff. But I think also just how she carries her body was important. There is, even though she's incredibly awkward and uncomfortable in situations, she also has this incredible strength that you see in this very, I don't know, powerful sort of like stance. Um, but yeah, I mean, I grew up loving crime movies, loving. And when I read this script, I knew that I was going to be playing this part. I was just so excited. And so I worked with Oz for so many hours on like all the details of the case. And like, I wanted everything to add up and like all to make sense. And oh, it was like a dream come true type of role for me.
I love that that was the experience. And
Uh,
even with what you were bringing up there, the idea of there's nerves and there's fear, and she's so new in this world, but at the same time there's a real strength and fortitude to her. And very early on there's a moment where she has to enter a house and she doesn't know what she's going to find on the other side, and she's just like, don't move. And it, even just those two words, the way that you delivered it, gave that sense of she's nervous, but she's making sure that she projects this idea. And did you
yeah.
want it to be that it's a projection, but then it kind of becomes more natural to her?
I mean, yeah, I think that was super important to bring in both of those. She is new, and I think it's important to bring in those vulnerabilities and nerves because that is real.
Yeah.
And instead of, I think sometimes people can make characters too strong and too tough and like, I'm so badass. And that's just not the reality. If I was thrown in that situation, I mean, it's so intense. And so, yeah, I think that there's, she's trying on the surface to act tough, but there's so, I mean, she didn't know what she was about to walk into. So, yeah.
There's also an intuition that she has as a person, and she describes it to someone else in the film as it's like someone's tapping you on the shoulder and telling you where to look, and it kind of guides her in a certain way to find information about the case throughout. And so, how did that shape a lot of her worldview? Because if you think about it as something that has probably always been a part of her, but she's never really quite been sure of how to process or how certain she is to trust it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you see in one of the first scenes with her boss, he said, you know, you've got half of the answers right. And I'm like, well, but I also got half of them wrong. And I think she's, like you said, she's always felt that throughout her life, but I think especially in this job, it's like this, it's all coming to the surface and it's overwhelming. But also there's maybe comfort in feeling like someone is guiding her. Um, but yeah, it was like a really sort of fun thing to play with, to bring in to the character where, you know, you have those moments where you don't. Yeah, it was quite fun.
And that moment that you mentioned just now was so telling in terms of her boss being like, you got half of it right. Like you have this gift. And she's like, I got half of it wrong. For you, is Lee someone that kind of puts a huge amount of pressure on herself? Because that was kind of like what I interpreted from that. It's like I'm always looking for the mistake rather than the success.
Definitely. I think that she puts a lot of pressure on herself to to do good, to be good. And um I mean, I think that's, you know, how she sort of goes through life and the things of like the OCD and wanting to be in control and wanting to be the best version, which isn't always the healthiest of outlooks, you know.
And as the story develops, you know, she kind of finds out that there's a personal connection that she has to everything going on around her. And so for you, how did that completely change the scope of how she's working on this case and how she's approaching things? Because all of a sudden there's potential that she's in much more danger than she thought at the very beginning.
That was a sort of difficult thing to navigate because, of course, you know, I read the script, I knew everything that was going to happen. And it was important, I think the same as Lee does, but to suppress those thoughts, those memories, and like really sort of, like I was saying earlier, pick those moments where there could be a little flicker of some sort of like a flash of a memory that would come in your head. But then you're like, no. Um, but yeah, it was like there's so many layers to it's like so hard again because I'm like I don't want to say anything that I can't say, but yeah, I just think that obviously, you know, as it slowly starts to unfold, she learns more about this killer and all these pieces that felt so far away start slowly coming together.
Mhm. And there's so much in terms of the sound design in the movie, and it kind of feels like we're hearing these kind of sounds and frequencies that Lee is hearing, and it's very much in her perspective. Was that something that you knew was going to be part of the landscape of the film? Did you and Oz talk about it, or was it something that he added later in post?
I had no idea. I was really when I saw the final cut, I was really blown away by sound design, the cinematography, um, the soundtrack. I mean, there's so many things that as the actor you don't know. You know, you just don't know till you see the final cut. And I was really, yeah, I was just really blown away. I was just like, wow, it's definitely something special.
Yeah, it's so incredibly done. And even in that same vein, there's so many moments where he's really cranked up just the sound of your breath in so many moments. Were you thinking specifically about her breath when it is kind of like a source of fear and panic, or was it something that you weren't aware of until you saw the mix and you saw it on the
No,
screen?
that was definitely like all the heavy breathing that was there. I mean, I'm sure he like cranked it up because why not? But no, I like I think a lot of those moments again, she doesn't show like necessarily outwardly fear, but it's internal and the breathing and that was something that I really held on to.
Yeah. And in kind of jumping into potential spoiler terrain and talking a little bit about your character against Nicolas Cage's character, you know, the two of you do get to have a couple scenes together in the film. And I was actually just very curious to start with on if you got a chance to see his entire look and aesthetic and the idea that he had for the character until you sat down opposite him in person to film scenes.
The director decided that he didn't want us to see each other, so we didn't meet. I didn't meet him as Nick, and I was not shown. There were no photos, anything. And I walked on set that day for that scene, and they had put him already in the room, and the director walked me to the door, and he's like, "Okay, just I'll give you a second, and I'll call action. The cameras are set up, we're rolling." And my heart was pounding so hard. And I opened the door and I saw him for the first time, and they have that footage in the film. But it was a pretty insane experience. I mean, you obviously know what he looks like in the film. You don't There's no part where you see Nick Cage in that. I mean, he's completely transformed his voice, his mannerisms, everything, and it was insane to say the least.
And there's a moment right before that where, you know, he's in an interrogation room and Lee is being shown video footage from that. And she kind of realizes maybe he knows a little bit more about me than I thought, down to the fact that he is talking to her intentionally in the camera and also singing happy birthday. And so what was the experience of filming a scene like that and just kind of what she realizes and is starting to put together in that moment?
Oh, it was so crazy. So we filmed that after, of course, but it was yeah, it's just his performance is so intense, and filming that scene, it's so haunting. And it was like, it was great. I mean, I just think Nick in this is incredible. And everyone in that room, I think everyone had to sign NDAs that day because it was like, so shocking what everyone was watching. But yeah, I mean, it's a very intense moment for Lee, and very uncomfortable because it's happening in front of a bunch of people, her comrades, the people that she works with, and so yeah, it was a lot going on in her mind.
And I actually love the detail that it's one of her female colleagues that drives her home and is very empathetic and is like, of course, I wanted to give you a ride after the day that you've been through. Whereas it feels like the rest of her colleagues are like, great, back to work, just another day in the office. And so what did you kind of envision as just her headspace that she's in after an experience like that?
Oh, I mean, that's the beginning of the unraveling of her. I mean, I think that at this point, more memories are filling her brain, and I think she knows going there that something isn't right. And I think that as much as she doesn't want to believe it, I think gut feeling, she knows. I mean, not that her mom's gonna go and shoot someone, but I think, again, she's got intuition, she has a sense.
And there's a moment that I love where she kind of steps outside of the way that she is the rest of the film, where she's sitting in the vehicle and she just kind of unleashes this, scream of anger and frustration,
You
and it's just
scream and
every
pull.
emotion. And so in filming a moment like that, that's so out of character, did you feel like I have to just make sure that everything comes across, that it's been building up and up and up to this level where this is how she's going to respond in this moment?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's understandable, everything leading up, just her whole world, everything that she thought she knew, uh, completely crumbles. And yeah, I think just it's heartbreaking, incredibly disturbing, but also just devastating for her.
Right, because the whole film, even with all of the kind of like horror and suspense elements to it, it ultimately comes down to this like really intimate character portrayal with you. And with the fact that you were talking so much about how this is a character that's so different to all of the characters that you've played the rest of your career, what were the spaces or elements of playing Lee that kind of took you the furthest outside of your comfort zone, but in a really good way?
I think I mean, she's just probably the most different from me, who I am as Maika. Um, and so, within that, it comes a challenge and wanting to make it as believable and grounded and bring in as much of like my own experiences through life as I can to the role to really give it authenticity. But there's a challenge in that, and there's a risk in that too, of like, really kind of stepping outside of what I'm used to. But I had the best time. I love Lee. She's great.
She's such a great character, and you've done such a phenomenal
Yeah,
job in your performance in the
thank
film.
you.
So thank you so much, Maika. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. So great talking to you.